So this is the Virtual Parent Academy, a workshop for parents, guardians, grandparents, aunts and uncles, mentors, coaches, anybody with a kid, anyone who's working in the lives of children. That's what this workshop is for. I do this workshop at schools all across the country, at centers in the evening, community nights where parents come out, community members, guardians come out to get information about current drug trends. And since we can't have everyone get together all the time, since sometimes busy lives get in the way, I decided to put this in a virtual format, and your school district is sending this to you. Please share this with every person that you know. My name is Michael DeLeon, and I founded a nonprofit organization called Steered Straight. In 2007, I was being released from prison. I spent 12 years incarcerated in New Jersey state prisons. And I knew that I wanted to reach kids all across the country. I wanted to prevent kids from following in my footsteps. I wanted to prevent kids from ending up in prison, ending up struggling with drugs and alcohol addiction. And I knew that I had not only a story, but I knew how to teach my story so it didn't become their story. You see, I don't want my past to become your child's future. And my objective is to educate you, parents, guardians, grandparents, aunts and uncles, educate you, coaches, mentors, anyone in the life of a child about what's happening in America today, what the current trends are, and what you need to know to talk to your child, to talk to your students about the importance of not only being aware of what drugs can do to the brain and do to the body, but prevent children from experimenting with drugs. So Steered Straight was founded in 2007, and we started going out to schools all across the state of New Jersey, educating kids about the dangers of drugs. Just say no, according to a lot of people, didn't work. The war on drugs, according to a lot of people, was a failure. How are we going to educate kids in a new, engaging, innovative, and current relevant way so they got the message, so they understood where experimentation could lead them? I don't want to go talk to kids in schools about heroin and fentanyl and meth and cocaine, all these hardcore illicit drugs. I don't want to just talk to kids about the unauthorized use, misuse, and abuse of prescription drugs that are not prescribed for them. I don't just want to go talk to kids about crime and prison. I want to talk to kids about where it all begins. So after interviewing 10,700 addicts, some who were incarcerated, some who weren't, after interviewing 10,700 people who struggled with addiction, I learned where it all began. And the only way to end addiction is to prevent it from starting in the first place. And the only place I can do that is with our children. So I knew middle school, high school students, elementary school, college, age appropriate, no one gets the same message. Elementary school kids get a message, middle school kids get a message, high school kids get a message, college kids. You have to do age appropriate delivery of the content, but you have to start the conversation with kids. If we don't end addiction experimentation, we don't end addiction. So this was my objective. And now we are the #1 booked school presentation program in the entire country. We don't only want to educate the kids, I want to educate the village. It takes a village. Well, if it takes a village to raise a child, we've got to educate all of the village about what that child is experiencing, what that child is being exposed to, what messages that child gets. And if parents don't know what to talk about, how can parents talk about it? So, while I was incarcerated, I wrote a book. It's going to come out in the next year. It's called Chasing Ruin and Finding Redemption. It's the story of my quest to kill myself, quest to destroy my life, quest to find what I was looking for in drugs and alcohol, which, by the way, I never found. And I wrote this book in prison. And so I really want people to understand not only what happened to me, but why. What happened to me, but where it all began. And after interviewing 10,700 other people who traveled the same path as I did, I learned that for most people, in fact, it's 91%, starts the same way. Adolescent use of alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana between the ages of 7 and 17, and it begins as a quest to self-medicate or to cope, deal with the depression and anxiety that stems from childhood trauma, adverse childhood experiences, abandonment, parental divorce, physical abuse, sexual abuse, relationship problems as a child. And these children experience this trauma. It's unaddressed by the school, by the family, by the community, by the country. And this adverse childhood experience and this trauma festers and turns into a sickness, basically. The kids look to escape that sickness, self-medicating, as they say, seeking out remedies. And unfortunately, in America today, the industries that are so geared on profit from addiction market and target children. So vaping devices, okay? E-cigarettes marketed directly to children, the new way to hook this generation on cigarettes and nicotine products. Alcohol, we had experienced years and years and years of alcohol use decline among adolescents. Now we are experiencing multiple years of alcohol use increase. That is a direct result of COVID locking America down, making sure every liquor store in America was an essential business, making sure that alcohol, marijuana, and all vape products were essential products. And people use those products to get through the lockdowns and the quarantines. And as more people use those products, they became more available for children. And kids' use of alcohol increased. Kids' use of nicotine increased. And kids' use of marijuana increased higher than it's ever been in American history. So we have a problem in our country today, worse than ever. In fact, the #1 cause of death in America, 27 years of age and below, is drugs and alcohol. And so I wanted to do something about it. This is a little video that explains a little bit about what I'm doing. No one taught me how to deal with family issues and hard experiences. I was introduced to drugs at just 11 years old. After spiraling out of control, I ended up in prison for a crime I did not commit, but one I was absolutely responsible for. Well, I'm your bad dream. But here's the good news. Now you get a second chance. I'm about to tell you the hard truth behind drugs that you have never heard before.
It should have been me laying there, not her.
I would do anything to hug you.
Alcohol,
Nicotine.
Vaping.
Marijuana.
Cocaine.
Meth.
Heroin. Bar music.
These are the consequences of making bad choices in life. This is how you have to visit your son.
12 years after doing my time, I committed the rest of my life to preventing drug abuse, traveling around the country because there is hope.
8.5 years later, I am still clean and living a life that I could have never imagined.
Making their test become a testimony. I want to share some of these stories with you. I am Michael DeLeon, and this is Straight Talk. Some people would like to hear this in another way. They don't want to hear the truth. The truth is we're losing a generation of kids. And I spent 12 years incarcerated as a direct result of a long experience with drugs and alcohol. And my drug and alcohol experimentation became addiction immediately. At the age of 11, I was handed a cigarette by a kid. He told me it would calm my nerves. Why were my nerves in need of calming? At the age of 10, my parents got divorced. My grades suffered, my behavior suffered, and I had a lot of problems in school. I went from straight A's to D's and F's. I went from the perfect attendance kid to getting suspended weekly. I went from having no problems, the angel child, to the terror of the school because I couldn't handle what was going on in my life. My father's abandonment, my parents' divorce, and the principal suggested to my mother that she take me for some counseling. So my mom took me to get some counseling. And the person, the trusted adult she took me to get counseling, sexually molested me 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I wasn't the only one. There was other kids that were molested by this person. And unfortunately, it was never really addressed. My trauma, this was the 70s. I don't know if you can understand different than it is today. We buried it under the rug. We swept it under the rug and we kept it quiet because it was not something that society really wanted to address. Physical abuse was going on. I had two uncles who beat me half to death because they were convinced that I needed to toughen up and they needed to beat me into manhood. So I struggled and suffered from child abuse, basically, all through middle school and high school. And this kid handed me a cigarette in the middle of this chaos and told me it would calm my nerves. Well, the cigarette turned into alcohol at a party the same week. The following weekend, I was at another party where a kid had a marijuana joint and he handed me the joint and I started smoking marijuana. Nicotine, alcohol, and marijuana at the age of 11 years old. Well, I was on pills by 13, 14 years of age. I was on cocaine at 16 years of age, heroin at 17 years of age, shooting heroin IV 18 years of age, and at 19 years of age, I found meth. And I was an out-of-control drug addict until 28 years of age when I went to prison. And my life of addiction didn't just affect me, it affected my family. It affected my family so much that it actually caused the death of the most important person in my world, the woman who brought me into it, my mother. I was involved in a drug deal that went horribly wrong, and two kids got shot. And because one of those kids who got shot died, I was held responsible. And two kids were tasked to come find me and kill me. And I was off on a drug binge to hide out, and they murdered my mother. May 14th, 1995, I returned home to find my 63-year-old mother strangled and murdered in her bedroom. May 14th, 1995 was Mother's Day morning. Mother's Day morning. Drugs and gangs and crime destroyed my life. And I became somebody I couldn't even fathom. I became an addict, a criminal, a pariah of society. And I affected every single person in my path, every single person in my family. But not once did I stop and think that my choices and my decision, that my addiction and my criminal acts would end the life of the most important person in my world. My mother was murdered on May 14th, 1995, and I have to get up every single day and admit that I'm the man who got his own mother murdered on Mother's Day morning because of my drug addiction. It is a horrible, horrible case. It is a serious result, an outcome. It's an outlier if you look at everybody's addiction, but no one controls where that addiction goes. No one controls who it affects. It gets out of control. And I want to end things like this from happening. I want to prevent violent outcomes like this from happening. And the only way I can do that, the only way we can do that, is if we prevent it from starting in the first place. You see, I didn't want to go to prison, but I did. My mother was murdered because of my choices and my decisions. And when I came home from prison, I was clean off of drugs. But 6 months after prison, I was in a violent car accident, and the emergency room doctor handed my wife and me, as we were released from the hospital pending surgery, 7 pharmaceutical bottles. And one of those bottles contained 360 80 milligram OxyContin. And I was right back on a path to addiction. I don't blame that doctor. I did for a while. I don't blame the accident. I did for a while. I don't blame my childhood trauma. I did for years. I knew better. Well, in the words of Maya Angelou, you do better until you know better. But once you know better, you do better. So I decided I was gonna do better. I almost got my wife and daughter killed. After everything that happened, I almost brought more death into my family. And I was returned to prison because of my addiction for 7 more years. 5 years turned into a 12-year nightmare. I was back in prison again. So I spent 7 additional years back in prison. Now, when I was in prison, I was asked to get involved in a program called Scared Straight. Probably heard of it. I convinced the New Jersey Department of Corrections that the Scared Straight concept doesn't work. Bringing kids into prison to scare them and threaten them and scream at them, it makes for good reality TV. In fact, they turned it into a reality TV show. It makes for good reality TV, but yet it's not reality. It doesn't work. Negative reinforcement by itself doesn't work. The kids are brought into the prison for the day, they're scared, and then they're returned to the same environment that produced them. What changes? Absolutely nothing changes. And that negative reinforcement even sometimes makes it worse. So I pitched the Department of Corrections on an idea. I knew that I needed to be part of the solution. I needed to no longer be the problem. So I wanted to take personal responsibility, not only in all the crimes that I was involved in, not only in my addiction, I needed to take personal responsibility in educating kids. Personal responsibility. Personal responsibility in drug education. PRIDE. So we started a project at the New Jersey DOC called Project Pride, taking personal responsibility in drug education. Who better to talk to kids about drugs? Who better to talk to kids about the results of drugs? Well, we decided that we were going to go out to schools. We talked to kids about the reality of what happens when you get involved in drugs, what could happen when you get involved in drugs, but what often happens when you get involved in drugs. The only way to end addiction is to prevent it from starting in the first place. So Scared Straight still exists today in many prisons across the country. Project Pride still exists in the New Jersey Department of Corrections, and there's other programs like it. But prisoners going out to schools, it's nice, but kids need to understand that there's a life of consequences from becoming incarcerated, getting arrested, committing crimes because of drugs. Even if you find recovery, even if you get clean off drugs, there's many, many consequences that follow you for the rest of your life. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to reach kids. So I got out of prison and I started calling some principals. Hey, good morning. I just got out of prison. I'd like to come talk to your kids. Hello? Hello? They hung up on me. I called another one. Good morning. I just got out of prison. I'd like to come talk to your children. Hello? I kept getting a dial tone. Who'd want the ex-convict to come talk to kids in schools? But when it comes to drugs, crime, gangs, when it comes to that, there's no one better. We put a consortium of people together with incredible engaging stories that can teach those stories, not just tell them, teach those stories and impact kids all across this country. And Steered Straight's now the #1 book school presentation company in America, and we are impacting so many kids. In fact, we just surpassed 13 million students in the last 17 years. But I don't just want to educate kids. I don't want to just talk to the kids. I got to talk to you. I have to talk to the parents, the guardians, the aunts and uncles, the coaches, the mentors. I have to talk to you. And I need you to understand this is a village approach. We've got to come together and we've got to save this future, this generation, because they are our future. I don't know if this has ever happened to you. The check engine light goes off on your car. You're driving, that check engine light comes on, but you don't keep driving. You go get it checked out. You don't pull over maybe, but you go to get it checked out. You put it on a machine, you find out what the code is. I like to use this analogy because the check engine light's going off on our kids, and we're not even taking it as seriously as the check engine light on our car. And we must take it as seriously, this warning sign on something that's much more precious than our cars, our kids. And based on my 47 years of personal experience, we are creating the next generation of addicts. We're not just watching it unfold. It's not just happening in front of us. We're creating it. We're creating the next generation of addicts. And I need your help to talk to your students, to talk to your children about this issue. The world remembers what happened March 2020, when our world was shut down, when America was shut down. What a lot of people don't really stop and think about was the closing of schools, ripping children out of schools in some states for 2 years. That loss of connection, that isolation, it was okay for a couple of days. That 15 days to slow the curve, that was a good one, wasn't it? kids home for 2 weeks. It was right at spring break time, so kids were thrilled. 2 weeks of spring break instead of 1 week, but then it became 3, and then it became 4, and then all across the country, people didn't know what was gonna happen. Some states stayed open, not too many. Most states completely shut down. No one really understood what was gonna happen in August and September of 2020. Were schools gonna open back up? Well, a lot of schools did in some states across the country. Many states kept their schools closed for another year. The mental health crisis that is a result of that decision is catastrophic. The academic regression, the substance use, the increase in suicide, the increase in suicidal ideation, the crisis we are experiencing as a country with our children is monumental. It's of epic proportions, but the media, our leadership, both on the right and the left, is ignoring it. Ignoring it. Well, we cannot ignore it, and we've got to address this. Prior to COVID, right before COVID hit, 2019, 2020, this was the slide I was presenting to parents and educators all across this country when I was doing parent academies and community events. I was showing people the catastrophic problem we were experiencing in America. We had a 50-year high of suicide. Life expectancy had decreased 4 years in a row. We were seeing an escalation of psych drugs being prescribed even to infants 0 to 3 years of age. We were seeing a massive increase in meth and cocaine. 100 billion opioids had just been prescribed over the previous 9 years. And fentanyl was taking over heroin overdose deaths all across America. We were in the worst public social health crisis our country had ever seen, and we were in the 9th straight year of overdose death record numbers. 9 straight years of overdose death record numbers. And adolescent use of nicotine and marijuana were at an all-time high. And I would ask people to point out on that screen what scared them the most, what bothered them the most. Nobody pointed to nicotine and marijuana. Everybody pointed to the things that seemingly are worse. But adolescent use of nicotine and marijuana drove every single thing else on that screen except infant prescribing of psychiatric drugs. Well, COVID comes and the schools shut down, and calls to suicide helplines jumped 800% across the country. Suicide was increasing, some said as high as 35%. Our overdose death rate was increasing all across the country. And fentanyl importation, fentanyl, a very potent, poisonous analog and synthetic morphine derivative opioid drug that was coming in from China through our borders. But this wasn't really a drug. This was a synthetic drug, and it was meant to increase heroin's potency. So heroin addicts all across America were dying in record numbers, and most were testing positive for fentanyl-laced heroin. This was a problem all across our country. But the fentanyl was now being pressed into fake pills, counterfeit prescription pills. And many people were taking those pills thinking that they were getting a pharmaceutical pill. They weren't. They were getting a fentanyl-pressed counterfeit pill, and they were dying. This was exploding all across our country when COVID hit. Talk about a perfect storm. Well, as COVID kind of unfolded throughout the year 2020, some states went back to kind of normal, brought their kids back to schools. Florida, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, the Dakotas, Wyoming. Some states were coming back, some districts in other states were coming back. I went back to my original slide prior to COVID, and I looked at all of it, and all of it was worse. It was all worse. And adolescent use of nicotine and marijuana were again at an all-time high, yet no one was pointing to that. Adolescent use of nicotine and marijuana. And I'm telling you, it's the most dangerous foundational trend our country will ever experience when it comes to addiction, because it's where all addiction begins. Alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana. Now I have nicotine and marijuana on the screen. I leave alcohol out for a reason. We were seeing a decrease in alcohol consumption among adolescents for 10 straight years. When COVID hit, we started to see an alcohol increase among adolescents. So I am adding alcohol to the mix, alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana, but at the time, I was focused on nicotine and marijuana. They were increasing to record rates, which is why alcohol was decreasing. Alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana among adolescents. Shutting our country exacerbated the problem. Taking kids out of schools made it worse. We disconnected kids. And through COVID, 80% of America's youth were completely disconnected from their life of normalcy. So what are we going to do? Well, that's what I want to talk to you about. We have to talk about this, not from a political perspective, not from an ideological perspective, not from a religious perspective, a socioeconomic perspective. We've got to talk to these kids from a truth perspective. And the truth is, the number one cause of death in America, 27 years of age and below, is drugs and alcohol. And alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana is the origin of 90% of all addiction. Alcohol, marijuana, and nicotine use among adolescents is at a record height. It's a perfect storm, and we have to talk about it. So you need to talk to your kids. And for the last, 20, 30, 40, even 50 years, the gold standard has been to talk to your kids at the dinner table. The family dinner. Sit down, have dinner with your kids, and the gold standard is 5 nights a week. You've got to eat dinner with your kids 5 nights a week. Teenagers who eat dinner as a family, they're less likely to underage drink and use drugs. Teenagers who infrequently eat dinner with their family are 4 times more likely to underage drink and use drugs. And the reason for that is because kids need to get the truth about drugs and alcohol, how they affect the body, how they affect the brain, how they affect our lives. Kids need to get the truth from their parents and their guardians. So sitting at the dinner table 5 nights a week is the gold standard. Ladies and gentlemen, you must eat dinner with your kids 5 nights a week. It was kind of easy during COVID. We were all locked down in our houses, right? But in 2022 and beyond, can families eat dinner as a family 5 nights a week? Every prevention organization in the country, I list just a few, but every prevention organization in the country advocates for the family dinner time. They say 5 nights a week, you must eat dinner with your kids 5 nights a week. And that's what I was pushing. I sat down at the end of COVID as COVID was dissipating, and I'm telling my wife, I'm telling parents that they've got to eat dinner with their kids 5 nights a week, and truthfully, I don't think they can. Some can, and if you can, God bless you, right? But cheerleading, football, soccer, band, extracurricular activities, traffic, 2 jobs, parents working different schedules. Can families eat dinner with their kids 5 nights a week? I didn't think so. So I decided I was gonna stop pushing you to eat dinner with your kids 5 nights a week. It's not the dinner, it's not even the time together. What matters is the conversation. You must have 5 conversations with your kids. Ideally, it's at the dinner table, but if you can't have 5 dinners with your children every week, you must, ladies and gentlemen, you must have 5 conversations. Now, I'm not talking about a 30-minute conversation, an hour talk. I'm talking about a 3-minute conversation, 3 minutes. Now, you'll be surprised how many of those 3-minute conversations turn into 30-minute conversations. But I need you to spend 5 3-minute conversations a week. It's 15 minutes. Everyone has 15 minutes to be a parent. 15 minutes of conversations. But if you don't know what to talk about, what are you going to talk about? So I decided I would not only advise you of topics, give you some subjects, I would give you the conversations. So we sat down and we authored a book. A guide, a conversational guide for parents. It's called Table Talks and Dashboard Conversations, and it has a conversation for every day of the year for 3 years. Are you gonna have one every day for 3 years? Maybe not. But if you have 5 conversations a week, 52 weeks of the year, which is what I'm asking, that's 260 conversations a week. So we gave you conversations for 365 days for 3 years. It's covering current drug trends. It's covering internal and external assets, the 40 developmental assets of growing up, increasing protective factors and decreasing risk factors. 3 years of conversations, and we call it Table Talks and Dashboard Conversations. I'd like you to sit at a table, a breakfast table, lunch, dinner table, a picnic table. If you can't sit at a table, have these conversations in the car. We've produced a spiral-bound book, and you can get Table Talks and Dashboard Conversations on Amazon. You can get it on our website. You open up this spiral book on your kitchen island, you figure out and plan these conversations in advance. There's journaling exercises and workbook exercises for you to do as a family. It brings you closer together as a family. It educates you, it educates your kids, and increases protective factors, and it decreases risk factors. It's a table talk and a dashboard conversation for every day of the year for 3 years. It won't guarantee anything, but it will increase the likelihood that your children will make the choices you want them to make when being offered drugs and alcohol. This is an incredible resource that you as a parent need. One of the things that the book explains is that drug addiction is not about drugs. Drug addiction is about the brain. And the 3 drugs I would like you to look at differently than you ever have before is alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana. Alcohol is a depressant. It depresses the brain's development. Nicotine in a cigarette and chewing tobacco in a vape pen is a stimulant, and THC, I'm sure you've heard about it, the molecule in the cannabis plant that gets you high, the psychoactive molecules in marijuana that gets you high, that is a hallucinogen. And if you as a kid are drinking alcohol, you're depressing your brain. You're vaping, you're stimulating your brain. You're smoking weed, taking marijuana edibles, putting it in a vape cartridge, you're hallucinating your developing brain. And most kids, unfortunately, that do one, do all 3. So now you're depressing, stimulating, and hallucinating the development of the adolescent brain. And that's what I want to get across to you. I want you to get it across to your children. The chart on your screen lists the cause of death for everyone in America. This is how everyone in America dies. Heart disease is number 1, cancer is number 2, and respiratory disorders is number 3. Respiratory disorders. Number 3, acute respiratory distress syndrome, cystic fibrosis, pulmonary disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, chronic lower respiratory disease. This 3rd leading cause of death is preventable, as is most of number 1 and number 2. But the reason why respiratory disease is number 3 is because people have been smoking 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Tobacco products, it's the number 1 contributing cause of death in the world. The reason why respiratory disease is number 3 is because people have been smoking. Well, for adolescents, 15 to 24, it's number 6. How is that possible? If it's number 3 because people have been smoking for 50 years, how could it possibly be number 6? Well, it's number 6 because of vaping and marijuana legalization. We are seeing an explosion of respiratory disease among our adolescent population, among our young adults, because of vaping and marijuana legalization. I don't really tell adults how to be adults. If you're 21 years of age and old and you want to drink alcohol, I don't have an opinion. If you're 21 years of age and older and you want to smoke weed for whatever reason, I don't have an opinion. If you're 21 years of age and older and you want to smoke cigarettes or chew tobacco or vape, it's the number 1 cause of death in America, but I don't have a public opinion. I don't want to tell adults how to be adults. See, I'm here for you because of your children. I'm talking about kids. So the brain doesn't develop at 21. The legal age to use those substances is 21, but the brain's not developed at 21. So I hope they would never use those products, even alcohol. But if they do, I hope they wait till they're 30. Like I truly wish the drinking age, the smoking age was 30, but it's not, it's 21. So if someone's 21 and they want to make that choice, make that decision, that's an adult choice. I just don't want them to make it till then. I'm focusing on kids. I don't want kids to touch those substances or any substance, but I don't want them to touch those substances until they're 21. And we are seeing an explosion of the 3rd leading cause of death in America, killing kids, because of vaping products and marijuana legalization. People aren't as concerned, as worried about respiratory disease. I mean, Just recently, the CDC announced 107,000 Americans had died from a drug overdose. It was an alarming number. It was the 12th straight year of increase. Alarming number, and it lasted a couple of news cycles. 107,000 Americans dead from a poisoning or overdose of drugs. Yet, in the same 12 months, almost 700,000 Americans died from tobacco-related illness. If we're measuring this by death, what's the real problem? If we're measuring this by death, what's the real issue? Tobacco products. But are we going to be as concerned about tobacco products as we are about fentanyl poisoning? As concerned about cigarettes as we are about meth? I don't think so. America's complacent when it comes to heart disease and cancer and respiratory disease. America's complacent when it comes to people dying of respiratory disease and illnesses from tobacco-related products. It's a sad truth. But kids are dying, ladies and gentlemen. Kids are dying. And I'm hoping people will be more concerned. In 2010, I had been home from prison for 3 years, and my best friend's daughter, Amber, died of a heroin overdose. She was a third-year junior at a very elite college in America, in Pennsylvania, and no one could understand how this beautiful 4.0 GPA, multimillionaire family, how someone like that could die of a heroin overdose. So I decided I was gonna make a movie about it. I mean, I don't know that most people would have done that, but I decided I was going to make a documentary film showing America what was happening in this beginning stages of a heroin and opioid explosion. So I made a documentary film that was released in 2011 called Kids Are Dying. It was the story of opioids led to heroin, this heroin crisis, and how good kids all across America were dying from heroin overdoses. Kids are dying. I shot this movie in 2010. It was released in 2011, and it is as relevant today as it was in 2010 when I shot it. I got out of my car in this little city next to Philadelphia called Camden, New Jersey. And I started walking down the street looking for a heroin addict to interview. It took me about 30 seconds to find her. And I walked over to her. Her name was Christina. These stills are first 4 kids I interviewed on day 1. These are the first 4 kids I interviewed that were homeless on the street. In the upper right-hand picture is Christina. She was living in that abandoned house underneath her. And I got out of my car, talked to her, walked over, told her what I was doing, said, I'm gonna make a documentary film and I wanna explain to kids where addiction begins. She said, you're gonna show this to kids? And I said, yes. So she literally pulled her arm sleeves up and she said, go show kids this. I don't know how old she looks to you in this picture. She's 21 years of age. Now I know she looks a lot older. When I say she's 21, you should hear the audience gasp. 3 years before this picture, she walked across her high school graduation stage to accept valedictorian of her graduating class. This young girl, 3 years prior to this picture, was top of her class in high school. She had a full scholarship to college. She became a cheerleader for that college football team, and she fell off a pyramid at a football game. She fractured her tailbone. They rushed her to the hospital. They put her on Percocet and morphine liquid. They added Vicodin. She got addicted to the opioids. She started seeing multiple doctors, getting opioids from multiple doctors, 5 of them. Once all the doctors found out she was doctor shopping, getting opioids from multiple doctors, they cut her off. They literally cut her off of her opioids. She was addicted to these opioids. She walked 6 blocks down in Philadelphia where she was living to a little section called Kensington. And she picked up some heroin. And within 1 month, this girl was walking the streets of Camden, shooting 30 bags of heroin a day. And 7 months after I interviewed her, she died. She died of a heroin overdose. In fact, all 4 of the first day of the kids that I interviewed, Brian, Molly, Crystal, and Christina, all 4 of those kids I interviewed on day 1, they all died before the film came out. Well, I didn't quit. I kept going. As hard as it was, I kept going. And I interviewed 137 kids on the streets of Camden, New Jersey. And 121 of those kids told me the same story, just like Christina. Opioids, a wisdom tooth extraction, a car accident, a football injury, a lacrosse injury, a soccer injury, their back, their ankle, their neck, they got a dislocated shoulder, a broken arm, and they were put on opioids. And they got addicted to the opioids. And then they found themselves on heroin. For 88% of the 137 kids I interviewed, opioid addiction led to heroin addiction, and that was the premise of my movie. That's what I wanted to show. Yet in the process of interviewing these 137 kids, it wasn't 121, it was 137. Every one of them had three things in common. 121 had opioid addiction in common, but 137 out of 137, every single one of those kids had three things in common. Before the age of 18, alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana. And I said, me too. Me too. Alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana. The depressant, the stimulant, and the hallucinogen. Before the age of 18, 91% of all addicts in America begin with those three substances before the age of 18. In my movie, it was 100%. Every single one of them started with those three substances. So, every prevention agency in the country, every treatment counselor, every school of addiction, substance use, mental health schools and classes and teachers and counselors, pretty much everyone accepts 90% of addiction starts as a teenager. 90% addiction is based on adverse childhood experiences and trauma. But where does the addiction begin? What substances? How can I educate kids about the substances? And so 10,700 interviews later, alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana, all three is prevalent in 91% of every single person that I've interviewed. After I produced the movie Kids Are Dying, I started getting phone calls from parents all across this country. You think Camden, New Jersey's bad, come to Long Island, come to Westchester, New York, come to Covington, Kentucky, come to Huntington, West Virginia, come to Tucson, Arizona. So I got in my car and I drove across the country and I visited 30 states and I interviewed 500 parents who had lost their kids to an overdose of drugs. 500. And I asked every mom and dad, before the age of 18, did your son or daughter drink alcohol? And 500 said yes. Did your son or daughter smoke cigarettes, chew tobacco, or vape before 18? 500 said yes. Did they smoke weed? And 500 said yes. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. Alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana before the age of 18. I said, maybe there's something to this. Of course there's something to this. So I want to talk to you about nicotine and marijuana, and then I want to urge you to go to our website to visit all of our films. Watch these films on their own and learn. Go to our website, take additional courses, download our learning management system, take additional courses to learn about specific things. But right now I want to talk to you about the two concerns I have, which is part of the trifecta gateway of addiction: alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana. And those two things, ladies and gentlemen, are marijuana and nicotine. And now they are intertwined. They are one and the same, nicotine and marijuana. The delivery systems, the marketing, and the companies behind them is the tobacco industry. They are one and the same. My third movie that I made after producing American Epidemic is called Marijuana X. The reason I call it Marijuana X is because it's not marijuana anymore. So I was in Boulder, Colorado, interviewing a woman for American Epidemic. Colorado had just went legal with recreational marijuana, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was walking down the city streets of Boulder, beautiful city, brick streets, and I came across this dispensary, and I couldn't believe it. I walked inside. I thought I was in Nordstrom's. I literally thought I was in some chic boutique. And the people there were explaining to me about how marijuana had gone mainstream, about how it wasn't the kind of marijuana that you roll up in a joint anymore. It wasn't some 5%, 7, 10% potent marijuana. It was new. This was the new industry. And America, unfortunately, had embraced this. My issue with marijuana is on kids, 20 and below. So there's no one who can argue and debate with me, because in every state that has legalized marijuana, it's 21 years of age and above. You're 21 years of age and above, I don't tell you how to live your life. I don't tell adults how to be adults. My issue, my mission, my purpose is for 20 years and below. And it's not legal for anyone 20 and below in any state in this country. I started to focus on what marijuana had become, and I was scared to death about what it was doing to kids. So I walked into a dispensary and I found these two little vape vials. They were like liquid weed, the sign said. And I asked the kid behind the counter, what's liquid weed? And he said, man, now you can vape it. What do you mean vape it? How do you vape weed? And he told me. He showed me the mod, the electronic device that the vials go in. So I bought the vials and I bought the device and I took it to friends that I have at the DEA. And they were able to test the level of potency in the vape weed, and they were able to give me a list of chemicals that were in the liquid. They weren't listed on the packaging, and the level of potency in that marijuana was 4 times higher than the dispensary that sold it told me it was. I said, we are in the middle of a crisis and this isn't gonna end well. So I made a movie about it. Now, in 1960, marijuana THC, which is also the molecule Delta 9, was tested for the very first time in conjunction with the DEA. It was 1%. When people say marijuana is a plant, it used to be. When people say marijuana is a soft drug, yeah, it used to be. Marijuana potency, THC potency to be more specific, Delta 9, was 1% in 1960. From 1960 to 2011, 51 years, marijuana potency went from 1% to 11.4. They increased its potency, they genetically modified it, they put female plants together, they made hybrids, they brought THC potency to 11.4%. It took 51 years to get from 1 to 11.4. They legalized marijuana in Colorado, and it took 2 years, just 2, to go from 12 to 37%. 12 to 37. They did in 2 years 3 times what they did in 51 years. Marijuana legalization was not marijuana legalization. What it was commercialization and industrialization of a genetically modified product whose potency was being taken to 100%. And ladies and gentlemen, that's where we are right now. So, marijuana and big tobacco. When I started putting this movie together, when I started doing all my research and investigation, I learned how they became one and the same. There was a strategy that big tobacco had for 80 years, right? And it was denied that there was any health harms to cigarettes. Attack people who said that this was a public health issue. They formed political lobbies. In fact, the tobacco industry at one time was the largest political lobby in all of Washington. And they obscured the science. They put out false science, okay? False data. But right in the middle of their strategy was target kids. And that's exactly what they're doing today. In 1994, there was a hearing in Congress. Congress had a reckoning, and they brought big tobacco in. It was the cigarette tobacco hearings in front of the Health and Human Services Committee of Congress, April 1994. And there was 7 tobacco executives sitting at a table in front of the hearing committee. And then Congressman Wyden from Oregon, he asked them all a question. 7 tobacco executives sitting in front of the hearing committee, and Congressman Wyden asks them a very simple question. I want you to listen to this question, and I want you to listen to their answers. And then I want you to understand how the strategy big tobacco used for 80 years is the same strategy that they're using with marijuana.
Yes or no? Do you believe nicotine is not addictive?
I believe nicotine is not addictive, yes.
Mr. Johnston.
Congressman, cigarettes and nicotine clearly do not meet the classic definitions of addiction.
I don't believe that nicotine or our products are addictive. I believe nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
And I too believe that nicotine is not addictive.
As I saw marijuana use exploding and vaping use among adolescents exploding, I started to see who was behind it. Altria and R.J. Reynolds, China Tobacco, British American Tobacco, all of these companies, tobacco companies, involved in the vaping industry. I was like, these are the same people. These names have changed, faces have changed, but the industry hadn't changed. So that mod, that electronic device that I got from that marijuana dispensary in the very beginning, well, I took it apart. It was about the same size as my clicker here, about the same size. I took it apart, and what I found was the same 3 components I have found in 108 vapes that I have taken apart. Every vape has 3 components in it. Every electronic nicotine delivery system, every electronic device that delivers marijuana or nicotine to the brain has 3 components in it. Number 1, there's a canister or a reservoir at the bottom where the juice goes, or a cartridge or a pod takes its place. Component number 2 is a battery. You can't have a vape without a battery. Sometimes they blow up in people's faces, but there's a power source, a battery. But the key to the vape, the key is the 3rd component. It's called a heating element. It's called an atomizer. And what happens when people put that vape to their mouth, the atomizer gets turned on by the battery, and the oil, the wax, the liquid gets heated up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. It vaporizes out of the device. When it vaporizes out of the device, it aerosols into the respiratory system. When these kids, when these adults are putting that vape to their mouth and inhaling it, it goes into the respiratory system. It's entering the body. Toxins, metals, plastic, rubber, chemicals, flavors. In addition to the nicotine, in addition to the drug, if it's THC, there's chemicals and metals and poisons, volatile organic compounds entering the respiratory system. The tobacco industry sold this to America like this was a healthy, safe, and innovative way to quit smoking. They literally told America, and they bought health advocates to come out and say, this is better than combustible products. This is a way to help people quit smoking, yet they marketed it directly to kids. Kids weren't smoking. Middle school kids, high school kids weren't smoking cigarettes. This wasn't a way to help people quit smoking. This was a way to hook the next generation on nicotine so they became tobacco consumers. And I'll tell you why. They flavored these vapes for a reason. They came up with these flavors for a reason. And the reason was your kids. The reason was your kids. We've got to educate kids about vaping products, but we've got to educate parents. I mean, parents think this is safer than cigarettes. Parents literally think that this is not a harmful product. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, this will become the #1 cause of death for generations to come. Respiratory disease. It's now number 3. It will become #1 because of vaping and marijuana legalization. And we've got to educate kids. So education of kids is the foundation to the addiction crisis. A couple of years after that hearing in Washington that I showed you, there was a big, massive fine of the tobacco industry in excess of $200 billion. And they peeled a little tiny bit of money off and they gave it to schools. Part of the settlement with Big Tobacco was to educate kids about tobacco products, what they do to the brain and what they do to the body. And so schools across the country were going to receive federal monies to educate middle school and high school students about the dangers of tobacco products. 1999 is where that educational process began. And at the time, roughly 34% of high school students smoked cigarettes. That educational program began. They formed the Rebel program, they did the Truth campaign, they educated middle school and high school students all about cigarettes, tobacco products, damage on the lungs, damage on the body, damage on the brain. And over the next 15 years to 2014, tobacco use among high school students plummeted to 7%. We went from 34% to 7% in 15 years. That red line you see on your screen is the demise of big tobacco. Ladies and gentlemen, big tobacco is going out of business because all the smokers are gonna die from the product. If there's no teenagers to take their place, that's it. Big tobacco is history. In 2011, big tobacco saw the writing on the wall and they said, not so fast. So what they did was they implemented the vaping products, the Views, the Vibe, the Zero, the Enjoy, the Juul, all these devices came out and they marketed them directly to children. And beginning in 2011, the American Lung Association started tracking high school vaping. High school cigarette smoking had plummeted, high school electronic cigarettes and vaping were skyrocketing, and now more nicotine is consumed in America through a vaping product than a combustible cigarette. The vape was never invented to help people quit smoking. The vape was never safer than cigarettes. The vape was invented to hook kids. The vape was invented to save big tobacco. The vape was invented to help save their industry. And it's exactly what happened. So over the years, the FDA has done very little. The regulation from the Obama administration, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, there's been very, very, very little regulation. And now we have a complete unregulated wild, wild west. And my data and my surveys show between 70 and 80% of high school kids have vaped, and about 60 to 70% of middle school kids have vaped. About 50% of high school kids and 40% of middle school kids are vaping on a regular basis. And all my data in thousands and thousands of schools is triple what the federal government says is happening. Well, the Juul, J-U-U-L, is the device that kind of kicked everything off with kids. They made flavors, creme brulee and mango and mint and fruit medley, and they marketed it directly to children. There were these little pods, P-O-D-S, little cartridges, and they fit in the bottom of the device, just like my clicker. It's even smaller than my clicker. And kids would put these devices to their mouth and they would inhale, and what they were putting in their body was chemicals. What they're putting in their body is flavors, diacetyl, propylene glycol, arsenic, formaldehyde, vegetable glycerine, and metals, plastic, and rubber from the device and the pods. So we started marketing this directly to children, and our federal government and our state governments were basically asleep at the wheel. Now we're in a crisis of epic proportions. What you see on the screen is a Juul device, but the pod, the little cartridge next to it, is not for nicotine. It comes from a company called Cushy, one of over 100 companies that are putting THC marijuana inside of cartridges that slip right into the Juul. So now the number one selling device that's on the market today, the marijuana industry is making flavored marijuana cartridges to go slip right into that device. So they don't even have to make their own devices, some of them do, but they can just make the cartridges and the pods that go into the most popular selling device. So now kids aren't just getting mango nicotine, they're getting mango marijuana, and it's exploding across the country. These pens look sleek, they're wrapped with little sleeves and great colors, they're flavored, and they're marketed directly to children. All these things look similar to thumb drives and flash drives because they wanted parents to think it was flash drives. They make all these different devices. Some of them are disposable, some of them are refillable. We have pens, actual pens that kids can do their homework with. They could be sitting in the classroom writing out an assignment, and they put the pen to their mouth, the actual pen that they're writing with, and it's not a pen, it's a vape pen. They can vape in the classroom. They can vape in the bedroom. They can vape in front of their parents, in front of their teachers, and you're not even seeing it. They're not gonna exhale a big thing of smoke, they don't have to. These devices now deliver such a small amount at a time, they could put it in their sleeve, they could put it in their shirt. We have inhalers, pumps that deliver nicotine into the body, deliver marijuana, THC, into the body. So now there's not an exhalation, there's not an exhalation of vape smoke. You just pump it into your respiratory system like an asthma pump. We have pumps that are delivering nicotine and THC into the respiratory system of children. We have watches, actual watches where the cartridge goes in the band or the cartridge goes in the face of the watch, and the watch actually works. And you can put the mouth to your watch and you can vape off of your watch. We have vapor cups that look like cups that keep coffee warm in the morning. We have key fobs, actual key fobs that look just like a key fob, but they're not, they're a vape. We have hoodies where the vape goes into the compartment of the hoodie and you vape off of your hoodie string. We have book bags where kids vape off their shoulder straps, where the cartridge or the device goes in the bedding of the book bag. We have cell phone chargers that can charge this cell phone but also doubles as a vape. So you hide your cartridge in your pocket or you put it into the phone charger. You vape off of your phone charger, but it's not, it's a vape. It's just attached to a phone. We have kids hiding vapes everywhere inside of big Sharpie pens. We have vape shops that are selling things called dime bags where you can hide a cartridge inside of a Velcro patch and put it on your hoodie or your jeans or your sweater. There's videos all over the internet, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, showing kids how to put drugs in pods, how to repurpose pods that are sold for nicotine or sold for marijuana, but how you can put other drugs in them. All sorts of videos on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube about how to put drugs in vapes. We now have vape cannabis delivering systems that are delivering 100% pure THC. 100% pure THC. They put these Pyrex tubes together and they fill them with flower marijuana and they put them in these big machines and they hook tubes up to them and they blast chemicals like butane and propane to burn through all the plant matter, and depending on the chemical process, depending on the terpenes and the chemicals that they use, they get different textures. They get different textures of marijuana that are 80, 90, even 100% pure. And they give it stupid little names like crack wax and earwax. They put it in little resins, okay? And they sell it all over the place as medicine. If you're an adult and you want to use any of these products, I don't tell adults how to be adults. You should just know what you're using. But my problem is, this is for children. This is for parents and guardians to know. I don't want kids to touch these products. Their brains and their bodies are not developed, and they are not equipped to handle the level of potency that this industry is now celebrating. This industry is now celebrating pure marijuana, like crystal THC, 100% pure. And right now, in some states, 95% of all the marijuana that's sold is not marijuana. It's resin, it's oil, it's vape cartridges, it's wax, it's the derivatives, the genetically modified, chemically extracted, industrialized and commercialized resins and extracts and derivatives of the marijuana plant. Most marijuana sold in America right now is not even marijuana. It's from the marijuana, cannabis, and hemp plant, but it's not marijuana. This is the problem. And in 2018, some craziness took place in Washington. There was a bill called the Farm Bill, 2018 Farm Bill. It was a good bill. Good for agriculture, good for the Midwest, good for every American, because we all eat. We need our farmers. This was a good bill for our agriculture industry, except inside that great bill, the Republicans and the Democrats put the full-blown legalization of hemp, H-E-M-P, the hemp plant. Every molecule in the hemp plant became legal when President Trump signed the 2018 Farm Bill. Republicans and Democrats together put hemp in that Farm Bill. Well, they knew what they were doing. A lot of people were okay with this because hemp doesn't get you high. Au contraire. Hemp gets you high. In the day, back in the 80s, you'd have to smoke a barrel of hemp to get high. You'd get sick before you got high. Ever since legalization of cannabis in 2012-13, scientists and chemists have been splitting molecules. They have been isolating molecules and increasing its potency. Well, they started to do the exact same thing with the hemp plant. And what they found were molecules in the hemp plant that were psychoactive, just like the cannabis plant. And they put the legalization of every molecule of hemp inside the Farm Bill. And because that Farm Bill was passed, it legalized marijuana, hemp-derived marijuana, synthetic marijuana. It legalized it in all 50 states across our country. And now you don't have to go into a marijuana dispensary to buy marijuana. You can buy it at a truck stop. You can buy it at a gas station. You can buy it at a 7-Eleven. In fact, you can buy it at some souvenir shops in Myrtle Beach, Orlando, Branson, Missouri. I've been there. They're selling Delta 8 and Delta 10 in shops all across this country. They are psychoactive, hallucinogenic. They get you high. And they are absolutely 100% federally legal all across this country. What we're doing now is we're extracting Delta 8, which is a molecule, hallucinogenic, psychoactive, Delta 10 out of hemp. We are putting it into resins and liquids and oils, increasing its potency, putting it into cartridges, putting it into packages, putting it into vape devices, and selling it all across this country. Putting it into trees, little joints, little gummies, little Skittles. We are putting this all across the country, and it is 100% unregulated. Not regulated by the FDA. This is still a Schedule I drug by the federal government. This is a product that's being sold all across this country to children, to kids. And our federal government is asleep at the wheel. Now we have synthetic THC, like THCO. They say it's in compliance with the law because it contains less than 3% of THC. Yet it contains 95% THC-O, which is synthetic THC, synthetic marijuana. HHC, hydrogenated marijuana, flavors and putting it in little candies like Pop Rocks and Skittles, gummy bears, where kids are bringing these products to schools and kids are overdosing. There was a 7th grader in Georgia who brought these Delta 8 Skittles to school and kids overdosed. The ones he shared them with, they overdosed. It came out in the newspaper immediately. It was assumed that it was fentanyl-laced candy. Fentanyl-laced candy. It wasn't. It was Delta 8 candy. A 7th grader shared it with other kids in school and they overdosed and were sent to the hospital. We are selling this stuff online all over this country and kids do not realize what they're getting. Kids do not realize what they're eating. These edibles are not controlled. They're not regulated. There's no quality control. But again, if you're an adult, I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. I don't tell adults how to be adults. I'm talking about children, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just talking about kids. And I don't want kids to touch these products. I don't want kids to consume these products. Delta 10, like Happy Pens? Happy Pens. What do you think kids would flock to after 2 years of isolation when they're depressed and anxious? Delta 10 sold in a vape shop, sold in a convenience store? Happy Pens? Yeah, I want to be happy. I want to deal with my anxiety and my depression, so I get these pens. They have no idea what they're getting themselves into. They're putting cannabis-infused toffee and cookies and chocolate and cereal all over this country. And where is the food industry with cease and desist orders because so many of these marijuana-infused edibles look identical to the packaging of Fritos, of chocolate chip cookies, of cereal, of Skittles? Where are the industries with cease and desist orders just on the packaging? So you're going to start to hear a lot more about cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, where you've completely lost control of your vomiting. You can't stop vomiting. You're going to start to hear a lot more about cannabis-induced psychosis, CIP. This is such a crisis, and the media is ignoring it. Our government's ignoring it. Our state and federal legislators are ignoring it. Our government agencies are ignoring it. We can't ignore it any longer. Our kids' perception of harm, of marijuana, of nicotine is lower than it's ever been. And when perception of harm goes down, use goes up. If kids think it's not a problem, their use escalates. We have the highest use of marijuana, nicotine use among children than we ever had in American history because our children do not think this is a problem. Unfortunately, a lot of parents don't think this is a problem either. You know, one of the scariest things that I do in schools, in my assemblies, I ask the kids, every state, middle school and high school students, I ask them about alcohol consumption in high school, marijuana consumption in high school, vaping consumption in high school, vaping consumption in middle school, vaping consumption in elementary school. And you should see the hands. But one of the questions that I ask kids is, raise your hand if you know a student, middle school, high school kid, raise your hand if you know a kid who's vaping and you truly believe they're addicted to it. And ladies and gentlemen, 60% of the kids in this country raise their hand. 60%. And if half of those hands going up are truthful, we have a crisis. Kids would come up to me after presentations, or they would message us, okay, on our social media. You came to my school, you make a lot of sense. I want to quit vaping and I've tried, I can't, what do I do? Parents would call us. You came to my son's school, my daughter's come crying to us saying she wants to quit, but she can't. We didn't even know she was vaping. How do we help our daughter quit? I have fathers bring their kids to parent nights and say they've grounded them and they've took their phone and they've locked them in a room and they've grounded them for life. And then they keep catching them with vapes. Kids getting caught with vapes in school. Some states will expel a student on the second or the third offense for bringing a vape to school, yet some of these kids can't help it. Some of these kids are addicted. Kids become addicted to nicotine. So they were asking me, what do we do? How do we help my son? How do I help my daughter? How do I get off vapes? So I went to Walgreens, Walmart, Target, Rite Aid. I went online. I bought every smoking cessation product I could find. And I sat them all down. And I started researching all of them and learning all about it, looking at the ingredients. And I started to read the back of the boxes. And on the back of the boxes, it says directions. If you are under 18 years of age, consult a doctor before use, because no studies have been done to show if this product will work for you. No studies have been done to show if the product will work for you under 18. Well, you know all that legal paperwork on the inside that we never read, we just hope and pray nothing goes wrong? Well, I read it, and you know what it says? No studies have ever been done. No studies have ever been done under the age of 18. These products, none of them, have ever been tested on a child. Now, as a parent, you have to make a decision. I know parents who allow their kids to eat nicotine gum to get them off vapes. I won't recommend it. I cannot recommend a product that's never been tested on a child to be used on a child. I just can't do it ethically, right? I know parents who put patches on their kids. I've seen doctors prescribe patches to high school students. I won't do that. I'm not a doctor. You have to do what you have to do. But are you gonna put your child on a product that's never been tested on a child to get them off of a product that they were never supposed to be on in the first place as a child? I mean, it's mind-boggling. So we absolutely cannot just treat this as only a legal issue or a disciplinary issue. It's a medical issue. For a lot of these kids, they're addicted. They are addicted to a chemical called nicotine. And a lot of what they're using isn't even nicotine, it's synthetic nicotine. And our FDA is not regulating it as of right now, not even regulating it. So we have kids vaping, inhaling synthetic nicotine. They're becoming addicted to it. It's crossing the blood-brain barrier. It's affecting memory, learning, it's attention, commitment, motivation, studying, concentration. We're devastating these children. We devastated them for 2 years by locking America down and taking kids out of schools. We created a worse mental health crisis than we had before COVID. And now we're marketing and selling and directly distributing nicotine salts and THC and vaping cartridges. I'm concerned about the respiratory problem. I'm also concerned about the addiction problem. I'm also concerned about the brain problem. We have to treat this as a medical issue because it is not simply a legal or disciplinary issue. And this is where primary prevention is so important. We've got to get to middle school and high school students. Parents and guardians, I want you to know Vaping is more dangerous than cigarettes. More dangerous than cigarettes. Again, I'm not telling adults how to be adults. Vaping is more dangerous than cigarettes. Secondhand vape exhalation contains more carcinogens in the exhalation than do combustible cigarettes. Secondhand smoke from a vape is more dangerous than secondhand smoke from a cigarette. That's something that you probably haven't heard before. And vaping is harder to quit than cigarettes because the nicotine is usually synthetic and the concentration level is higher than a cigarette. So it's harder to quit. So quitting. I have a 12-step guide on my website that I would like you to look at, like you to read. If you're a student, a child, a young person, if you're a young adult, you want to quit vaping, if you're a parent, guardian, mentor, coach, grandparent, and you want to help your young person quit, you want to quit yourself, go to our website. 12 steps that I have come up with that I believe will help you navigate this process of quitting. As parents and as educators, we must understand that vaping is harder to quit than cigarettes, and these are kids with underdeveloped brains. It's harder to quit cigarettes as an adult. Imagine how hard it is to quit a vape with a higher concentration level of nicotine when their brain is underdeveloped. The vaping products are higher in concentration than the cigarettes, and this is a medical issue, not just a disciplinary and a legal issue. One of the things I say to parents and guardians all the time, teachers all the time, law enforcement, the medical community, the civic community, churches, the faith-based community, kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. You've got to get across to children that you're not just disciplining them, you're not just telling them they can't vape because you think it's harmful. It's deadly. It's gonna change their life forever. Kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I know you care. You wouldn't be watching this if you didn't care. Your school district wouldn't be sending this out if they didn't care. I'm begging you, please. I'm not just talking about overdose. I'm not just talking about medical consequences. I'm talking about the cognitive function of their brain. Changing the cognitive function of their brain, their psychological capacity, how they communicate, they acquire skills, how their creativity is manifested, how they retain knowledge. This is a crisis of epic proportions, and we are losing a generation of children. And nicotine and marijuana are the two most misunderstood products when it comes to kids. We have to keep kids off of these products, including alcohol, because 90% of all addiction begins as a kid. 90% of all addiction, 91% of all addiction begins with 3 chemical substances: alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana. Again, alcohol is a depressant, nicotine is a stimulant, and THC is a hallucinogen. The only way to prevent addiction is to prevent it from starting in the first place. We've got to prevent it from starting in the first place, and the only place that we could do that is with our children. So we have a ton of information for you. We have educational material on drugs. We have websites, partnership websites that you could go to, NIDA, NIH, the DEA, all sorts of places where we can send you off of our website to learn more about drugs. We are on social media. We post daily on Facebook and Instagram, TikTok. We're trying to get information out there to kids and to families and to communities. We urge you to follow our social media pages. We have a book that we published for parents and guardians called Table Talks and Dashboard Conversations. It is the only book of its kind in America, in the world actually. It's the only book of its kind. Conversations that you can have with your children on alcohol, drugs, protective factors, internal assets, external assets, increasing protective factors, decreasing risk factors. And not just about drugs, about self-worth, self-value, connection, integrity, honesty, accomplishment, goals, okay? Addressing these issues as a parent and as a guardian. SteeredStraight.org is our website with a plethora of information. You can go to the parental portal and you can go to resources and you can get further information. I thank you so much for taking time to watch this. I am so grateful to your school district for sending this out to you. I appreciate your concern watching this all the way to the end. I hope you've learned something. Our contact information will be on the screen. You can contact us. Please, please, please share this with everyone that you know. If we've been fortunate enough to come to your school district, please help us become fortunate enough to go to your sister's school district, your brother's school district, your cousin's school district. There's 10,600 middle schools and high schools in America. We're trying to reach every single kid. We want to save this generation. Thank you again for watching this. SteeredStraight.org is your website where you'll find further information to go all to our resources. I appreciate you watching this. Thank you and God bless.